An asphalt road, a wire fence line, a cattle grid, a quiet turn off the highway 20 kilometres past the edge of town. Rolling paddocks, dry summer grass, scattered box gums, a low crest that looks like every other gentle rise across the central tablelands of New South Wales. This is Orange, a bustling regional city with a university campus, an airport, line-marked streets, and more than 40,000 people living and working here year-round. Not an isolated outpost or a remote camp in the desert, a city with traffic lights, cafes, and hardware stores. And 20 kilometres from its central business district, beneath a ridge that generation after generation took for ordinary grazing land, lies one of the largest gold and copper ore bodies ever opened on the Australian continent. A pit so deep and wide it dominates the surrounding topography. Since the first gold was poured here in the late 1990s, that single discovery at Cadia has kept producing, pulling millions of fine ounces from the rock, gram by single gram. What is remarkable is not simply the sheer scale of the gold, but that it sat unnoticed beside a main road, passed by geologists and locals alike for over a century, before anyone understood what they were standing on. How did a rural city best known for its orchards and cool climate wines come to host a world-scale mining operation right on its doorstep? And if an anomaly of this magnitude could remain concealed beneath a gentle hill in settled country, what else is still waiting beneath the surface of the continent for someone to read the rock correctly? Start with the ridge itself. A low, unremarkable swell in the terrain that looks identical to 1,000 other hills across eastern Australia. Nothing on its surface gives away the immense mineral system locked underneath. Widen the frame, and Cadia sits inside the Lachlan Fold Belt, a complex, ancient belt of deformed volcanic and sedimentary rocks that stretches through New South Wales and Victoria. Widen again, and that belt forms part of the Macquarie Arc, a chain of ancient volcanic islands that drifted across a vanished ocean hundreds of millions of years ago, colliding with the early Australian landmass and embedding its deep metal wealth into the edge of the continent. Widen to the state and national level, and New South Wales ranks among the most significant gold-producing regions in the country, with the Cadia complex accounting for more contained gold than almost any other single intrusive system found in Australian history. At a time when national priorities are increasingly focused on securing domestic supply chains for critical minerals and strategic metals, identifying deposits of this scale is no longer just a commercial ambition for exploration companies. It is a fundamental question of resource security. The numbers make the scale concrete. The Cadia operation has produced well over 10 million ounces of gold, alongside hundreds of thousands of tons of copper, since commercial production began. At current market valuations, the material extracted from beneath those quiet paddocks comfortably exceeds 15 billion Australian dollars. The processing plant handles tens of thousands of tons of ore every single day, crushing a mass of stone equivalent to thousands of loaded haul trucks every 24 hours. For the vast majority of that stone, the gold is completely invisible to the naked eye, running at an average grade of around 1 gram of gold per ton of rock. Imagine taking a single metallic paperclip and grinding it into a fine dust, then spreading it evenly throughout a solid boulder the size of a family car. That is the concentration. The mill extracts that grain of metal continuously at massive industrial volume. The complex also directly employs more than 1,000 workers, providing steady, year-round economic activity for a regional area where stable long-term jobs shape the local economy. The district surrounding Orange was not unexplored country. First Nations Australians, specifically the Wiradjuri people, held deep, continuous knowledge of this country for tens of thousands of years, navigating its waterways, ridges, and stone resources long before European arrival. When colonial settlers arrived, early miners panned local creeks for alluvial gold during the original New South Wales gold rushes of the 1850s, and small-scale surface workings for copper were opened at Cadia as early as 1861. But those early shafts barely scratched the surface, targeting thin iron outcrop veins before being abandoned when the easy ore ran out. For more than a century, conventional wisdom held that the district was exhausted, a minor historical footnote from the 19th century. The true shift came in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Geologists working for Newcrest Mining did not rely on surface signs alone. They began systematic diamond drilling through hundreds of meters of barren cover rock, guided by an emerging geological theory that the ancient volcanic rocks of the Macquarie Arc could host massive, low-grade porphyry systems similar to those found around the Pacific Rim. When the drill core came up from depth, it revealed extensive networks of fine quartz veins laced with copper and microscopic gold running through altered monzonite rock. It was not a single rich vein that a miner could follow with a pickaxe, but a massive, disseminated stockwork running hundreds of meters deep. In 1992, drilling confirmed the true dimensions of the Cadia Hill deposit, proving that what had been written off as a quiet agricultural hill was actually the crown of a gigantic mineralized complex. The discovery transformed Australian exploration geology, demonstrating that world-class deposits could still be found in long-settled regions right beneath ordinary soil. To understand why an ore body of this scale could sit undetected beneath ordinary grazing paddocks, one must look back roughly 440 million years to the Ordovician period. At that time, the eastern margin of what is now Australia did not exist in its present form. Instead, an island arc system, similar to modern-day Indonesia or the Philippines, was actively forming offshore in an ancient ocean. Subduction zones forced oceanic crust deep into the Earth's mantle, melting rock and generating magma plumes that rose back toward the surface. As these magmatic intrusions cooled beneath volcanic centers, superheated hydrothermal fluids rich in dissolved silica, gold, and copper were driven through surrounding fractures in the rock. Over millions of years, these fluids deposited microscopic particles of gold and chalcopyrite into intricate web-like fracture networks within the cooling monzonite plutons. This was the triggering event that established the Cadia porphyry deposit. Then came the continental collision. As tectonic forces pushed the volcanic arc westward, it smashed into the cratonic edge of the Australian continent, crumpling, faulting, and uplifting the entire region into what geologists now document as the Lachlan origin. Following this violent assembly, tens of millions of years of subaerial weathering began to reshape the landscape. Erosion stripped away thousands of meters of overlying volcanic rock, bringing the deep-seated porphyry stockworks closer to the surface. But just as erosion threatened to expose the deposit to the elements, a secondary geological event buried it once more. During the Silurian and Devonian periods, subsequent marine inundations and volcanic episodes laid down hundreds of meters of barren, sedimentary and volcanic cover directly over the top of the mineralized zones. Later again, tertiary basalt flows capped large sections of the central tablelands, creating a flat, protective shield. The deep wealth of the Earth was sealed beneath a blank sheet of ordinary rock. This multi-stage geological history created the precise condition that misled generations of prospectors. Traditional 19th century gold mining in Australia relied almost entirely on surface expressions, rich quartz reefs cutting through slate, or heavy nuggets concentrated in river gravels by running water. When European prospectors explored the Orange and Blaney districts following Edward Hargraves's initial gold discovery at Ophir in 1851, they searched for those exact surface signatures. At Cadia, early miners did find small, iron-rich outcrops and narrow copper lodes on the surface, opening small underground shafts like the Iron Duke mine in the late 19th century. However, these surface workings produced modest yields and were quickly worked out. Miners assumed the deposit was small, shallow, and localized. They had no conceptual framework for porphyry gold-copper systems, which were not widely recognized or understood by global economic geology until much later in the 20th century. The surface signs were interpreted as a complete story, rather than a tiny, distorted whisper from a massive system buried hundreds of meters below. By the mid-20th century, the geological maps published by state bodies like the Geological Survey of New South Wales recorded the Cadia area as a historical mining site of limited future potential. The surrounding land was subdivided into pastoral holdings, used primarily for grazing sheep and cattle. The official record had effectively closed the book on the district. It took a fundamental shift in scientific understanding, combining regional magnetic surveys with revised plate tectonic models of the Lachlan Fold Belt for geologists in the 1980s to question that long-held assumption. When Newcrest Mining initiated deep exploration drilling at Cadia in 1992, they were not chasing visible gold on the surface. They were testing a theoretical model that predicted a massive mineralized system lay concealed beneath the barren cover rock. Drill core extracted from depths exceeding 300 meters proved the model correct, intersecting hundreds of meters of continuous, low-grade gold and copper mineralization. The geological mystery was solved, but it immediately raised a complex technical challenge. How do you economically extract millions of tons of low-grade ore buried under hundreds of meters of solid rock without destroying the surface environment? The breakthrough at Cadia did not begin with a prospector's hammer or a sudden surface strike. It began with data processing and a fundamental change in how exploration geologists read regional physics. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, state and federal agencies, including what is now Geoscience Australia and the Geological Survey of New South Wales, conducted extensive regional airborne geophysics programs. Low-flying aircraft fitted with tail-mounted magnetometers swept across the central tablelands, recording subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by different rock types buried far beneath the surface topsoil. When those aeromagnetic surveys were compiled into regional map sheets, geologists noticed a distinct circular magnetic high centered beneath the quiet farmlands south of Orange. The anomaly did not match the mapped surface geology. On published cadastral maps and historical mining plans, the area was shown as unmineralized volcanic rock and ordinary grazing paddocks. But the aeromagnetic data, paired with regional gravity surveys that measured minute differences in rock density, pointed to a heavy, iron and magnetite-rich intrusive body sitting at depth. The physical signature was unmistakable once viewed through the lens of geophysical processing. A deep-seated monzonite plug had pushed into the surrounding country rock, altering its magnetic and density profile without ever fully exposing itself on the surface. To test what the instruments were seeing, exploration teams brought in diamond drill rigs. Beginning in 1992, drill bits tipped with industrial diamonds cut through hundreds of meters of barren rock, retrieving continuous cylinders of solid stone known as drill core. When geologists split these cores open in core sheds on site, they found a dense, interlocking network of thin quartz veins, fine chalcopyrite and native gold, a textbook porphyry stockwork system. Subsequent geochemical assaying of thousands of core samples confirmed that while the grade was low, running around 1 gram per ton, the mineralization was extraordinarily continuous over vertical and horizontal distances measuring hundreds of meters. To map the full geometry of the deposit before investing billions in mine infrastructure, geologists turned to seismic reflection profiling, a technique adapted from oil and gas exploration that uses acoustic shock waves to map underground rock layers, alongside modern satellite imagery and airborne digital elevation models. UPB zircon dating using sensitive high-resolution ion microprobes precisely dated the host monzonite plutons to roughly 440 million years old, placing their formation within the Ordovician volcanic arc phase of eastern Australia. What 19th century miners had dismissed as an exhausted surface copper patch was revealed by modern instruments as a massive, multi-million-ounce gold and copper complex stretching kilometres into the earth. The landscape had not changed at all, but the tools used to examine it had unlocked an entirely new reality beneath the grass. Yet, as the full scale of this subterranean discovery became clear, it raised an immediate and far-reaching question. What happens to a quiet regional community when a world-scale industrial operation opens right in its backyard? Today, the consequences of unlocking that hidden ore body are visible in every corner of the local economy and environment. What was once quiet grazing country is now home to an industrial infrastructure network operating 24 hours a day. Transitioning from open-pit mining to large-scale underground panel caving required constructing miles of subterranean tunnels beneath hundreds of meters of rock. The panel caving method allows operators to undercut the ore body, letting gravity collapse the fractured rock into draw points below, a highly efficient technique that processes tens of thousands of tons daily, but one that permanently alters the structural integrity of the mountain above. The environmental footprint is substantial and strictly monitored by state authorities like the New South Wales Environment Protection Authority. Water management in a region prone to severe drought cycles presents a constant operational challenge. Processing low-grade porphyry ore requires millions of litres of water daily to separate microscopic gold and copper from pulverized stone. Mine operators recycle up to 80% of process water, sourcing additional supplies through licensed allocations from local river catchments, treated municipal effluent from Orange, and groundwater pumping. Tailings dams, holding millions of tons of finely ground rock slurry, cover hundreds of hectares of land, requiring long-term geotechnical monitoring to prevent seepage or structural failure. Economically, the discovery transformed the local government area of Orange and the neighbouring Cabon Shire. The mine generates hundreds of millions of dollars annually in local supply contracts, regional wages, and state royalty payments. Property values in Orange reflect this industrial presence, as hundreds of skilled miners, engineers, and technical specialists settle in town with their families. But this economic injection creates a dual reality. While local businesses benefit from sustained spending, traditional agricultural sectors compete directly with the mine for local labour, land, and water rights. The physical reality of the site remains largely hidden behind tree lines and ridge boundaries. Drivers passing along the nearby highway see little more than security fencing, access roads, and high-voltage power lines stepping across the hills. The true scale, the vast underground caverns, the grinding mills, the sophisticated monitoring networks, exists entirely out of sight. Yet Cadia is far from unique. It is simply the most fully realized example of a geological phenomenon that repeats across the volcanic belts of eastern Australia. As exploration techniques advance, geologists are applying the lessons learned here to other quiet paddocks across the continent. Which brings us to the ultimate question. If a multi-billion-dollar mineral system could hide in plain sight so close to established towns and major highways, where else across Australia is the map still waiting to be rewritten? The hunt for the next hidden anomaly across Australia is no longer confined to historical mining towns like Orange. Across the continent, geologists at Geoscience Australia and state geological surveys are deploying machine learning algorithms to re-evaluate millions of line kilometres of legacy aeromagnetic and gravity data, searching for hidden geophysical patterns that human eyes overlooked decades ago. From the covered terrains of the Gawler Craton in South Australia to the deeply buried extensions of the Mount Isa Inlier in Queensland, exploration companies are drilling targets beneath hundreds of meters of barren sedimentary cover. What Cadia proved is that world-class mineral systems do not stop where surface outcrops end. They continue beneath the cover, completely invisible until an instrument reads the underlying physics. What kept this massive ore body unnoticed for over a century was not a lack of effort, but a rigid geological assumption. The belief that major gold deposits in eastern Australia were strictly confined to narrow, high-grade quartz veins that had to show themselves on the surface. There is still much about the deep subsurface that remains unresolved. Deep seismic reflection arrays continue to image the lower crust beneath the Lachlan origin, but the precise structural pathways that allowed magmatic fluids to breach the upper crust 440 million years ago are still debated by economic geologists. In many regions across Australia, cover rock remains so thick that current geophysical techniques can only estimate target depths within broad margins of uncertainty. Potential discoveries remain locked beneath pastoral leases and desert sands, hidden not by secrecy, but by the physical limits of current technology. The official map sheet always looks complete, printed with crisp lines, boundary fences, and named roads. But the ground beneath it is an unfinished story, holding deep time and immense wealth just out of sight. Which landscape or local feature in your own state or territory has always struck you as holding a hidden history beneath the surface? Tell us in the comments below, and consider subscribing to explore more overlooked geographic anomalies across Australia.